men are turning more, we're proven to be
more right-wing,
more conservative, but the women are suffering out here. So I would like to know, I'm involved with TP USA, and I want to know what it is that I can do when I'm around women here in Las Vegas, Nevada, which I'm battle born in this battleground state. And I would like to know what I can do to start to change minds with love. And
why do you think women are so liberal?
You know, it's I watched you on the
whatever.
Yes, yeah. And it's crazy. I mean, it's just it's so hurtful to see, you know, how they are, and how it's just so, you know, okay. And I think that a lot of them are suffering, and I think that, you know, there's a lot of father issues there.
A lot of daddy issues, for sure.
Issues.
Yeah. So look, I'm not an expert in how to win over young women for conservatism. The biggest thing is this: more young women need to get married at a younger age and start having kids. The single woman issue is one of the biggest issues faced in a civilization. Yeah. We have more single women in the early 30s that are the most depressed, suicidal, anxious, lonely in America's history, because there's a biological clock that's going on, and they realize that they're not going to be able to have kids, and that they're not as desirable in the dating market or in the dating pool. And so they start to lash out on the rest of society.
So date like you're going to marry, I guess that's going to be.
Well, yeah, just get married early. Like, reject the siren song of modernity and have lots of kids. Like, being a partner at a local law firm actually isn't that big of a deal. Having 3 kids is a really big deal and will make you happier. And it's okay to be a stay-at-home mom. In fact, we need a lot of stay-at-home moms. And a lot of women want to be stay-at-home moms. And we have miserable women because we've been shuffling them into a corporate wasteland, when in reality, a lot of them don't find a lot of passion or fulfillment in that line of work. And who can blame them?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
God
you.
Bless you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jesus can't save these hoes. Why are you trying? What make you think you greater than Jesus, nigga?
That nigga got a point.
What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Ron, back with another video. If you're new to the platform, welcome to the tribe. By the end of this video, hope you subscribe. So I got a video for you guys from Melanie King. Shout out to Melanie King. Her channel has grown a lot since I last, since the last time I was following her consistently. And her audience clearly has broadened. She's been covering a lot more, I would say, political side of things, and this is kind of sort of related to politics. I think it's kind of all connected when you really think about it. But you know, there has clearly been a divide between men and women in America, and this current presidential election has definitely proven just that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it.
So, Twitter has been obsessed with this graph from data journalist John Byrne Murdoch at the Financial Times, which apparently illustrates the growing political divide between young men and women in several developed countries. And it's triggered a furious row on social media, with the right blaming the new gender gap on what they see as excesses of identity politics and modern feminism, and the left blaming it on what they see as toxic masculinity and a reactive anti-feminist misogyny. So, in this video, we thought we'd take a look at the growing gender gap and the data behind it, some of its potential repercussions, and finally, offer some tentative explanations for what might be causing it. Now, the first thing we need to say is that while we're obviously grateful to John Byrne Murdoch for drawing attention to the phenomenon, the Financial Times aren't the first to notice that women are becoming more liberal than men. The so-called gender gap was first observed in the late 90s and early 2000s, when academics started noticing that men were no longer more left-wing than women. Yep, you heard that right. While it might be hard to believe today, until the 80s and 90s, men tended to be more left-wing than women. In the US, for example, women historically voted Republican, but started moving towards the Democrats from the 1980 election onwards. In fact, you can kind of see this in the FT graph, where the blue line starts off slightly higher than the red one. While in the UK, young women suddenly veered towards Labour at the 1992 election, while young men did the opposite. This gender gap, where men were more liberal than women, and which lasted from the end of World War II until the 80s, is known in the literature as the traditional gender gap. Conversely, the gender gap we see today, where women are more liberal than men, is known as the modern gender gap. But while the modern gender gap has existed for the past 30 years or so, that piece in the FT suggests that it's widened significantly in the past few years with Gen Z. Now, because much of the data involved essentially uses party affiliation as a proxy for ideology, it's hard to say whether this is because young women are getting more liberal or young men are getting more conservative. For instance, while at first glance the graphs apparently suggest that it's mainly women getting more liberal, with the notable exception of South Korea, it could instead be argued that women have stayed the same, but conservative parties have moved right and taken young men with them, which would mean even more women voting for liberal parties, even if their politics haven't changed. Anyway, whether it's men moving right or women moving left, it's at least true to say that the gap between the two sides has widened according to recent data. In this sense, there are now 3 gender gaps. The traditional gender gap running from World War II until about 1980, when men were more liberal than women. The modern gender gap running from 1980 until about 2020, where women were more liberal than men. And what we might describe as the Gen Z gender gap, which began a couple of years ago and refers to the fact that young women are now much more liberal than young men.
And there is probably some truth to the Gen Z gap theory, because if you look up the stats, as of right now, we have more male versions than in the history of the Americas. We have more male versions than we ever had right now. Men are having sex, ages 30 and under, are not having sex within the last year. Gen Z men are, from what I can tell, seem to be far more conservative than the women, which is kind of scary when you think about it, because with the way sexuality and sexual liberation is pushed among women, and it's very hard to find a woman with a low body count, it kind of makes you put two and two together and think to yourself, no wonder women think men aren't shit and there aren't no good men out there, because if there's a subset of men that are not having sex, but women are still having sex at basically the same rate or even higher than they were prior to these other gaps, it just goes to show you that a lot of these women are just sleeping with the same men. Just a theory, but that's just me using logic. Let's keep it moving.
Inferring causation is difficult here. It's plausible that this widening gender gap could have some pretty severe social consequences. For instance, some commentators have suggested that this widening political chasm could be contributing to declining marriage and fertility rates in the developed world. As South Korea's gender gap has widened, its marriage rate has declined, and it now has the widest gender gap and the lowest fertility rate in the world. But what actually explains this gender gap? Well, while there are obviously a whole load of factors, research suggests that the most significant factor in the modern gender gap was actually secularization. In the 20th century, conservative parties, like Christian democratic parties in Europe, had strong links to the Catholic Church, while liberal parties were generally more atheistic. So, as women were more religious than men, and religion is a key determinant of voting behavior, perhaps unsurprisingly, women voted more conservative. While women are generally still more religious than men, the decline of religion and its strength as a determinant in voting behavior meant that women shifted left in the latter part of the 20th century. Religion might also partly explain the Gen Z gender gap. General social survey data from America suggests that in the last couple of years, young women have suddenly become less religious than young men for the first time in post-war history.
Let me just quickly add, I know I talked a long time, but that's what this is. That is another component of it, is because religion is seen as patriarchal, where men are generally, especially in the Catholic and Christian faith, which are the main religions in the West, where men are seen as the head of the household, the head of things. Men lead, men are on top. These are the principles that are taught biblically. And so there has been a tearing away of biblical principles or tearing women moving away from it because it doesn't support the same message. It goes against the idea of the female supremacy, the female structure in society. And so when you go into a thing and, God is seen as the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, it's these male pronouns. It's a male dominated religion. And so when you are fed a diet in society and social media that women, equality and women, and anything that goes against it is wrong, well, you're going to see even young women who have raised religiously to be turned off by religion because it's seen as a misogynistic control device over women. Same thing with their bodies and their choices, because religion comes against a woman having control over her own body. And so you can see all of these things go hand in hand. They're tandem as to why we are seeing what we're seeing in the data today.
There are also...
Now, I want to ask the audience this, because what she said actually sounds pretty valid when you really think about how religion is structured. But I was always under the impression that it was had more to do with propaganda, why you don't see religion being pushed as much as you used to years ago. However, I do think there's some kind of coalition between the two, definitely, for sure. When you consider how religion is structured, it's not as structured as the man being the head of the household and, patriarchal and all that. Even though, if we're being brutally honest, today's society is definitely more matriarchal. I think women are just being brainwashed to believe that it's still patriarchal in order for them to keep pushing matriarchal beliefs, when in reality we're already living under that, and that's being painfully obvious due to the lack of men that are interested in trying to get married or start families. Let's keep it moving.
The data today.
There are also clearly case-specific reasons for this too. South Korea's gender gap, for instance, seems to be closely related with the fact that South Korea is one of the most culturally conservative countries in the world, with a higher than average fraction of men saying that women shouldn't work, and one of the worst work environments for women globally. While in Europe, some of the Gen Z gender gap seems to be partly driven by contrasting views on immigration. More generally, though, commentators often point to the polarizing and radicalizing effects of social media, or the increasing salience of cultural issues like feminism and identity politics. While these explanations might be intuitively plausible to some viewers, they're hard to actually prove with data, so we're not going to go into them in too much depth. However, one related and data-driven explanation is education. Women today often spend more years in education than men, and education has become an ever more important determinant of voting behavior, especially in the US and UK, where one of the best indicators for liberal voting intention is whether or not you went to university. Finally, though, one other explanation could be that the Gen Z gender gap just doesn't exist. For starters, it doesn't actually show up in other data sets, like the Cooperative Election Study or the General Social Survey. Now, to be fair, the Gallup polling used in the FT does have a larger sample size than the GSS and a lower non-response rate than the CES. But even then, some commentators have suggested that this data overstates the Gen Z divide by focusing more on how men and women identify politically rather than actual policy preferences, i.e. the difference between what's known as symbolic ideology and operational ideology. For evidence of this, take a look at this 2008 paper, which suggests that while younger generations of women are increasingly likely to vote or identify as left-wing than their male counterparts, the gap between them on actual policies and values remains pretty consistent. Data from 2020 suggests that something similar is true for Gen Z. While young women are far more likely to identify as left-wing, when you ask them about actual policies, the difference between men and women is pretty minor.
And this is what I mean. It's all the top line messaging. And this is why we don't really get into depth in policy. And you'll see this with Kamala Harris and what's going on, because she is no longer an old white man and she is now a younger, people always say she's not black. She's not black. I just have to say that because that's the top line of what people say. Black woman. And it's seen, okay, once she's a woman, she has a vag, so that is going to sway on emotions. Then we have, she's black, she's a minority group, a protected class, which is the liberal policies are all about trying to supposedly promote that, or they've deepened the racial war, the gender war on their side. So those are things that sway emotion. And then what do you hear about Donald Trump from that side? It's all about he's a rapist. He's had 34 felonies. He said this and he said that, and he's just a racist. He's just a bigot. He's these top line things that actually don't go into policy. They don't actually say, okay, what are the policies that affect your life? What do you think about this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue? They don't have to go into that because the top line messaging are designed to sway emotions. And what do women respond to the most? Emotional messaging, emotions, the liberal things that'll be about emotions. So if you say, but gas prices were better under Trump. Sorry, I got an eyelash right there. Gas prices were better under Trump. But I don't care. I vote blue anybody who. He's a misogynist. The economy was doing better. You had more money in your pocket. Well, I'm sorry. He is just, he is a racist. Like, even then when you ask people, will point out where he has been racist, what he's done is racist, what are his racist policies, what is that? Well, one time he said, bringing over the Mexican border, they're bringing their rapists and all these other things, and they're committing crimes. Even if that can be shown is true with some of the crimes that we've seen with the open borders policy, well, even if you bring logic, that once you capture someone emotionally, it's very hard to break anything logically. Okay. And I would say, the same could be said on the right, but it's less so. There are some things where they'll say a person who is, who doesn't like black people, well, then they're going to want to go right. And that's their emotional thing. But that is few and far between. These are anecdotal things. I would say the larger, bigger swath of, or the bigger share of the liberal messaging is all playing on emotions. And when the person is locked in emotionally into something, that's it. You logic will not break through at all. And this is why they know what they can do. And this is why Kamala Harris actually has the opportunity to beat Trump, because you can never downplay how much an emotions-based messaging, especially if it's beat through the media, beat like a drum in the media constantly. Kamala is transformational and she's doing this, and then you have celebrities and you have all of this, and it just feels good. It feels nice. And then the right will try to fight back with, well, policies and this and that and the other and these points. And it's really a hard messaging to get through because, again, you're caught up in the moment. It is not going to be until down the line when the emotions have released and calmed down, the honeymoon has settled down, and then policies are affecting your life negatively. That's when you see someone turn on a politician or turn on a party. But by then it's too late. We see this clearly.
And you know what? I'm glad she mentioned this because, and this is going to be an unpopular opinion, I already know it is, but this is one of the reasons why, well, along with other reasons that are a little bit more on the conspiracy side of things, why I really never got into politics. If it's one thing that always zoned me out about black people is that, okay, I'm gonna vote for this person just because he looks like me or just because she looks like me. And these people probably got policies in place that won't support you or be beneficial to you in any kind of way. Now, considering that this was the vice president and considering how much black people been complaining about Joe Biden, and just like she said, regretting that decision because y'all made that decision based on emotion instead of logic and what was best for the country as a whole. Now y'all are in a position where it looks like y'all gonna fall for the same okie doke again by having them have Kamala Harris run for president. Well, we all know damn well, like, let's be honest. And this is just another theory. If you disagree, fine, so be it. I really don't care. But after the assassination attempt on Trump, Joe Biden knew he didn't have a chance in hell. He didn't have a snowball chance in hell. So what do? You know what? I'm gonna drop out, and we're gonna have the vice president run. Black woman. We're gonna tug on the feelings of women and black women, and with women being majority of the population, then that should swing things back in our favor and keep Trump from winning this election. Just a theory. I'm just using logic. I'm just putting 2 to 2 together. Y'all may disagree, but if not, let me know what you think. If you're new to the platform, please subscribe. Oh, geez, I appreciate the love and support. Make sure y'all hit that bell notification. That way y'all know what I'm uploading. Hit the like button because that's with the algorithm and helps me reach a broader audience. Also, look out for the travel vlog channel, Unplugged Traveler. Link is in the description. Until the next video, y'all. Deuces.
you.